Hello everybody, Jim here with another quick how-to video, this time on brakes. I'm going to change out the front brake pads on a 97 Honda Civic. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, before we get started here, let's set a few things out. You're going to need your jack, your tire iron, jack stands, brake pads, your C-clamps, either 2 or 3 inch, a ratchet, and your socket set. And if you happen to drive a GM and you're doing this on a GM, you're probably going to need a T55 Torx socket. It could be either an outer or an inner for that application. You may want to check your service manual before you get started, find out exactly what
you're going to need to make sure of before you get started is, especially on a front wheel drive car, is you're going to want to make sure that you set your emergency brake. This is going to lock your rear wheels and make sure that when you lift the front end of the car up off of the ground, that your car is not going to roll back on you.
We'll go ahead and get the car raised up here on the first side that we're going to do. We're going to need to take your jack and find your safe jacking point underneath on the frame. You're also going to want to find your spot where you're going to set your jack stand, because you don't want to trust your hydraulic jack in case your hydraulic pressure goes out. You'll end up either squashing yourself or damaging your car quite a bit. And the only major thing on a car that's going to kill you is the weight of the vehicle. So you want to make sure that you have your vehicle up in the air, safe and secured. You're going to want to put that rib right here on the frame, right through the center of your jack stand. Usually they have a nice little holder for them. And slowly lower your jack down onto your jack stand. Don't completely lower your jack. Leave it into place where you jacked up at, and this will add an extra safety measure in case your jack stand happens to fail. You'll have a split second to dodge the bullet before your jack might collapse. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and take off the wheel. Just about the same as any other wheel. Make sure your vehicle's been placed in park. It'll make it so much easier on you by having your transmission locked. After you get your tire off, you want to make sure not to disturb your brake dust anywhere. Your brake dust may contain asbestos, and that's one thing you want to try and avoid. If you want to try and clean up the inside of your rim or try and clean anything up in here, make sure you use a wet rag in order to do so. That way you will not disturb any of the dust that's inside here. That'll also help you to collect it, and then as soon as you're done wiping everything up, you want to make sure to throw that rag away. A quick little breakdown on your brake parts here. You have your brake rotor and your brake caliper, and then your pads are inside the caliper right inside here. What we're going to do is we're going to take the caliper off, and we're going to inspect the brake rotor, make sure that it's not too worn out, too damaged. It may need to be turned. Most shops will recommend that you turn your brake rotors every time you change your pads. It's not necessarily necessary unless it's really, really bad. If it's real bad, then you'll want to make sure you get them turned down. And then when you get them turned, the shop that you have turn your brake rotors will automatically check your size and make sure you're still within specs, and you don't have to replace your brake rotor. On your brake caliper, we're going to go back here, and right back here, these are going to be our bolts that we take off. There's going to be one up here, and there's going to be one down below. Usually there's going to be only 2. There's usually also going to be this hanger right here that holds the caliper in place, but we're not going to need to remove that today, as our rotors are going to be alright to leave on. Go ahead and take the brake we're going to go ahead and take the brake caliper off now. This one happens to use a 12mm hex head bolt, so we'll just get that on there. Make sure we go righty tighty, lefty loosey. And then if you need to, if it's too tight you can't turn it by hand, just real easy, make a fist around your ratchet, cup your hand, and just give yourself a pop. Once it's broke loose, it'll go ahead and it'll just come right out with your fingers. Go ahead and break both sides loose and then remove the bolts. And once you remove your bolts, your brake caliper itself, take one side off and then kind of just wiggle it on off. And then you want to make sure never let your brake caliper hang along the brake line itself. That applies too much pressure and you could end up breaking your brake line, and then you have to have your car towed and taken into the shop to get replaced. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our brake caliper and we're just going to set it right up top here, and we will come back to that in just a minute. So we'll go ahead and take the brake pads off of the holder. These just slide right out. You use a screwdriver to take them off. Whatever you do, just be careful you're not applying any pressure to the inside edge of the rotor. Like again, we don't want to damage that, and it will play a balance role in your steering. Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll replace the brake pads themselves now. You want to make sure that when you check in your box, there's going to be two different pads, and there's going to be two sets. One of them is usually going to have your screech warner, and your other one's just going to be just the pad. The one with the screech warner on this model happens to go in the back. You want to match the arch in the pad to the arch in the rotor. They will not go in backwards. Once that just slides right in, just like that. Now, on your brake caliper, you have a couple of different things that are entailed in there. You have a bleeder valve, and you have a brake plunger. We're not going to loosen the brake bleeder valve. We're just going to use one of our C-clamps. This one's going to end up needing this 3-inch. And we're going to take the C-clamp, use it on the inside of your brake plunger, and you want to make sure that the back side doesn't go against anything but the caliper housing itself. You want another one of those things, you don't want to make sure you're not going to damage anything when you apply pressure. Once you start getting snug, you're going to want to make sure that you just apply slight pressure and you carry it back slowly. You don't want to wrench down on it, because what in essence we're doing is we're applying brake pressure in reverse, and it's going to take what fluid's in this housing, push it back up the brake line, back up into the brake fluid housing under the hood. It's okay, it's just your reservoir filling back up and then overflowing. You'll want to check underneath the hood after you're completed and wipe away any excess brake fluid. Go ahead and replace the brake caliper housing. At times it may seem that it's kind of loose. You'll also notice that these pieces right here aren't going to let it slide back in. So what you're going to have to do is apply a little bit of pressure by hand to get that back into place. Go ahead and take your brake caliper bolts and hand thread them in, because remember they unscrewed with your fingers as far as you can go. And grab your ratchet, tighten one side up pretty good, then go back, tighten the other side up. Then you want to go ahead and check your service manual, or you can check online. Most of them will have a torque specification that you need to torque these down to. If that's the case, you'll want to go ahead and grab a torque wrench and make sure they're torqued down good. What we're going to do is I'm going to just grab it with my hand like that, cup my hand, pop it good 3 times. If you notice too, inside here there's going to be a little bit of a gap. We're going to fix that later before we've moved the vehicle and put it back on the road. Again, with your lug nuts, start them out by hand. The reason for that is you don't want to cross thread your lug nuts. If you cross thread a lug nut while you're tightening these down, you end up having to replace the whole lug stud assembly, and that's a very difficult task. On your car, if you have 4 lug nuts or 5, your tightening pattern will be different. This is a 4-point. Go back to the one you started and you torque it down. This pattern, you go from here to here, up to this one, and then across. And then always go back to the first one that you started torquing down and retorque it. All that's left is to go ahead and re-raise your jack just enough to pull your jack stand out and set her down on the ground. When you set your jack down, make sure you just set it down slowly. See that you don't set your wheel down on anything you don't need it to. Okay. And then repeat for the other side. Now, before we're all said and done, we need to do a couple of quick things while in the car prior to it going on the road. You're going to go ahead and start your car up. Let it idle up. Take off your emergency brake. Let the car settle back down. Leave your car in park and then depress the brake pedal, let off, and keep doing that until you get pressure. What this is doing is this is closing that gap on that brake caliper and making that caliper hug those brake pads tight. Both reverse and drive with lightly on the brake are holding, and you can go ahead and you can take off with your car and make sure that your pads are working good. That's it. Not a whole lot to it.